I'll admit up front, I'm not really the biggest baseball fan. Like the NBA, MLB has way too many games that don't matter, and I really don't like the series approach to playoffs. Why is 7 games or 5 games a more valid determination of which team is superior than, say, 3 games, or even 1 game? Anyways, I may not be the biggest baseball fan, but you know who is? Fucking Japan. It's their favorite sport, and unlike America, when people say that, it's actually true. They're crazy for it, and it is certainly represented in anime. There are tons of baseball anime like Major, One Outs, Ace of the Diamond, Touch, Cross Game, Big... But these aren't what I mean by baseball episode. I'm talking about baseball episodes that are in shows whose main plot aren't about baseball. Got it?
Put me in cold. I'm ready to play today. Put me in.
Look, I'm gonna be honest. The first 2 are not gonna be as in-depth. I wanted to do an innings theme for the sections, but needed 9 and ended up with 7, so just bear with me and we'll get to the interesting ones in a bit. The baseball episode of Haruhi is basically a mandatory inclusion due to 1, it being in Haruhi, and 2, it's a good simple example of what I'm looking for in a baseball episode in terms of how a show structures that episode around the characters, setting, and story of the show. I'll admit though, this is the one I have the least to say about, mostly because I just don't find Haruhi as a show as interesting as the ones we're about to talk about. That isn't to say there aren't things to appreciate here. For example, the main reason I think this episode works is how the show writes the quirks and character traits of the show itself into the episode structure. And to illustrate what I mean by this, let's examine how each character responds to the game.
驚きですね。本当にちょうど1000本ぴったりですよ。
そんなもんを数えているお前の方が驚きなよ。
It's pretty cool. I think doing this is mandatory to create a baseball episode that feels unique, instead of just an episode about baseball, but with the aesthetics and character models pasted over it. So naturally, the rest of the shows I want to talk about do just that. Samurai Champloo is an extremely bloody and violent show, so you wouldn't think a baseball episode would work here. But what makes it work is that Samurai Champloo, despite its bloody tone and demeanor, actually has its fair share of comedy. But not so much comedy that a baseball episode is something you would expect. This is a very strange episode that comes out of nowhere, but somehow I think it's one of the show's best episodes. Like another show we'll talk about later, despite being about baseball, this episode's body count is just as high as any other episode of Samurai Champloo, something the show is quite eager to make you aware of. If you think about Samurai Champloo as a show, despite being about baseball, this episode features everything you would expect from any other episode of the show. It's violent, a lot of people die, there's plenty of over-the-top comedy, and Mugen's penchant towards impulsive, unnecessary violence both starts and ends the conflict of the episode. But the real showstopper here is the voice acting. If you've watched anime for a while, you've probably heard your fair share of Japanese voice actors speaking horribly broken English. But this episode turns that on its head by not just having Japanese actors speaking terrible English, but also English actors speaking horrible Japanese. And I must say that American characters' shitty Japanese is way funnier. Like, fucking listen to this shit.
Who's in charge here?
Hey, ここの責任者はどこにいますか? Joy Cartwright Teitoku. 私は通訳の WD です。
Whoa! Baseball? Son of a gun.
Brand New Animal is a bit of an oddball. While featuring a lot of Trigger's visual flair through dynamic color and sharp character designs and highly fluid and expressive animation, Brand New Animal pretty much just came and went. People were excited about it, it came out, and now no one talks about it. And look, I won't pretend I don't know why. The characters and premise are fun, but the show mismanages its tone, moving away from the fun and lighthearted tone of the early episodes towards a more serious one as it goes along. Which of course doesn't work because the central plot of the show is boring. This results in a show that doesn't know how to play to its own strengths, and just kinda leaves you with an overall feeling of, However, when it chooses to lighten up and dislodge itself from its own furry bum, it is quite enjoyable, and that is no more evident than the baseball episode Greedy Bears. I think this is by far BNA's best episode, if not solely for the reason that the central plot is barely present during the episode. This allows the show to mostly focus on characterization, world building, and most importantly, being actually fun to watch, something the later episodes don't seem to care for. Anyways, I love this episode. It's funny, it highlights the show's really cool visual style through sick animation moments and neat colors, and it's just a really fun underdog story. And while I don't like the corruption part of it because it feels really token, it's at least a good way of tying the events of the episode thematically to the overall plot. I'll say this up front, I am not the biggest fan of Stardust Crusaders. Like, obviously it's JoJo, and I will take any part of JoJo over like 90% of shows, but it being JoJo is the reason I don't like it as much. Because it's pretty clear that Stardust Crusaders is just Araki experimenting with stands and seeing what does and doesn't work. And what I mean by that is that there are a lot of fights that feel like they could be cut to smooth out pacing and nothing would be lost. The stands of many characters are rather confusing matches for the character they represent, and the character designs leave a lot to be desired in terms of variety. Big strong man, thin sexy woman, ooga booga character design go brrrr. Not that these are all entirely bad things. For example, all the men being buff guys is fucking hilarious to look at, even if it's really confusing that a character like Kakyoin is that buff. And also, like, how does Magician's Red represent Abdal? Anyways, I still like Stardust Crusaders despite a rather long list of flaws that hold it back. And one of the reasons is that despite being at the onset of stands as a concept, Araki still manages to create interesting fights by utilizing his signature fight style, which is basically Dragon Ball Z meets Sherlock Holmes? I love mysteries as well as battle shonens, however it is very rare that these two things intersect, and JoJo is that rare fusion of the two that manages to not just succeed at bringing them together, but to excel at it, and Darby the Gamer is an excellent example of this. This episode is so-so as a baseball episode, like, for fuck's sake, they don't even finish the game. But it's less about baseball and more about Jotaro and the mind games he plays with Darby. The main hook of the episode for me is trying to read Jotaro. For the entire game, the audience is deliberately left in the dark about what exactly Jotaro's plan is. For the first half, we're left to wonder what the fuck he's doing and why he keeps sticking around, and the second half of the game is us wondering how the fuck he's doing this, which is what I think is neat. For this episode, we're treated to Darby's perspective. This is a neat inverse of how most JoJo fights go, as usually you're wondering what the enemy stand is and how they're going to attack our heroes. But here, it's the opposite. Since we already know how Darby's stand works due to the previous game, Araki flips the table and keeps us in the dark about what Jotaro and Joseph are up to, meaning we're just as confused as Darby is. Which I think is a really cool choice, because if you think about this fight and how it plays out, that's kind of perfect. It's all about Jotaro being Darby at his own game, slowly breaking Darby's confidence by confusing him, playing mind games, and eroding his faith in his skill until he finally admits defeat, because that's exactly how Darby defeated Kakyoin. It's great! Great episode, and a fucking great example of Araki's mastery of executing a mystery and building a fight structure through character interactions, even as he was just starting to figure out what to do with stands. Incredible. Jujutsu Kaisen probably plays the concept of a baseball episode the most straight, as this is actually just the characters playing baseball. By default, that does technically make it the least interesting of the baseball episodes here, however that doesn't stop it from also being the funniest. Jujutsu Kaisen is a funny show already despite it generally being bleak and horror-tinged in tone and appearance, but this episode really knocks it out of the park. Okay, look, it's the fucking character blurbs. They're so goddamn funny. I don't know who wrote these, but they're amazing. Dorohedoro is about the last show you'd expect to have a baseball episode. It's an extremely violent, bloody, and just fucking weird show with an offbeat sense of humor as well as a dirty, gross setting. None of this exactly screams, you know what? This show probably has a baseball episode. At the same time, though, this is exactly what Dorohedoro would do. And you know what? This is pretty much exactly what you'd expect if you heard this show had a baseball episode. Like all the other episodes we talked about, Dorohedoro takes the concept of a baseball episode and reshapes it in its own image. What do I mean? Well, like the setting and half the people in the show, everything is falling apart or rotting. This guy is a zombie puppet that's held together by loose stitches. There's fucking magical death holes all over the field. Also, both teams are cheating. Classic Dorohedoro. But I think the best part is how it ends. The game stops because someone abruptly dies, and there is nothing more Dorohedoro than that. I'm gonna be honest, the main reason I made this video was so I could talk about Full Swing. This is probably my favorite episode of anything ever, and for a lot of reasons. However, it isn't really much of a baseball episode in the same way the others here are. This episode is more about life, sex, growth, and facing your fears. For this show, baseball is a metaphor for something greater. It's probably sex, but swinging the bat is vague enough to where it can apply to basically anything. And thematically, it's clear that what Naota is going through here delves a bit deeper than needs to have sex. That's part of it, but his refusal to express himself or take a stand against his fears and anxiety takes center stage here. As the show goes along, it makes it pretty clear to the viewer that Naota is struggling a lot with the fact that his brother left to play baseball overseas. This manifests itself in a lot of different ways, like how he dislikes that Mamimi calls for his brother instead of him in another episode, but I think a key way it impacts Naota is his lack of confidence and tendency to distance himself to conflicts that make him uncomfortable emotionally or physically, such as here, and especially the interrogation scene with eyebrows in the middle of the episode. Note how Naota keeps dodging eye contact here, a telltale sign of lying. Not necessarily lying to eyebrows, but more so lying to himself. The main conflict of Full Swing, at least big picture, is the giant satellite bomb that's threatening to destroy the city. But obviously it represents more than just a big baseball meteor. The obvious answer is sex metaphor, as the show is not exactly shy about making it clear what this is supposed to be. But like I said earlier, just by virtue of it being such a simple metaphor, it can be applied to pretty much anything. Nothing can happen until you swing the bat is a statement that seems simple but is oozing with subtext. To me, it's a metaphor for life itself. It's a metaphor for growing up, being assertive, and learning to take control of your own life. One of the hardest things for me after graduating high school was the shocking realization that once you're an adult and on your own, there isn't anything more to life than what you make of it. When you're a kid and just going through school, there's always that obvious road you have to follow through high school. There isn't really much to determine in terms of what you want to do or goals. Your goal is to graduate. What you want to do is important because you need to go to school and finish your education. There's always that track you have to follow. But once that's done and you're done with school, it's all up to you. What you want to do for a living, where you want to live, what your goals are in life, your dreams, who you want to be with, every decision is in your hands. And that's a terrifying reality that's hard to come to terms with. So I didn't. For years, I would just hide in my room all day and play games or watch anime or movies. I was too scared of the future and the idea of facing it to do anything, so I did nothing. I refused to take control of my life. I wasted years and years doing nothing but desperately trying not to live from my childhood bedroom in my parents' house. Eventually, I found a series of unrelated shows and movies that helped gradually shatter the facade. Stuff like Welcome to the NHK, Whiplash, and even Steven Universe. And most importantly, an anime named Fooly Cooly. In one sentence, it revealed to me exactly what I refused to acknowledge for so many years. Nothing can happen until you swing the bat. It's a hard concept to fully internalize, but it's something that's absolutely vital to being a functioning adult. That you are responsible for your life. You're responsible for your happiness and what you get out of life. No one else. Not your parents, not your friends, you. And that's hard. It's hard to come to grips with when you feel like you don't know why you're here. When you feel like you haven't found what it is you were put on this earth to do. The other side of this metaphor is that it's inherently a statement about change, and the need to be able to change as you mature. Because to realize your definition of happiness, you have to be willing to change, and to make changes. Because once you're an adult, you don't have mom or dad to swing down and do it for you. At least, if you're not a loser. If you think that you're fat, if you hate your job, if you don't have any friends, if you feel lonely and are afraid of dying alone, these things are your fault. And what I mean by that is they're your responsibility. No one can change these things, except for you. No one will change these things, except for you. If you want them to change, you have to make sacrifices and work hard to change them. You have to decide for yourself that you've had enough and that you want it to change, or it never will. You will throw years of your life away running. And I know, it's scary. Facing your own insecurities and fears is really fucking hard. It's the hardest fucking thing I've ever had to do. But it wasn't the simple realization of what I had to do that made me do it. It was the realization that nothing would change until I decided to get up and do something. And that message, and the way that Fooly Cooly delivers it, in a way that challenges you emotionally and mentally, on top of being incredibly entertaining with tons of excellent animation and creative visuals, are why I think this episode is one of the best that anime has to offer. That's on top of having like the best fucking finale to an episode ever. It's genius. This is just straight up some of the best editing and direction you'll ever see from the medium, leading to Naota's moment of truth when he finally has to decide. Life is what you make of it. Your purpose, your actions, your goals. You will go nowhere until you decide for yourself what you want to do. Will you watch as the world passes you by? Will you sit there doing nothing because you're afraid to do something? Or will you swing the bat? More so than even Samurai Champloo, my last entry here is placed in a series that tonally is a bit of a mismatch. This series is even bloodier and more violent than Champloo, and comedy is very rarely featured. And given the setting and premise, it's incredibly strange that a show like this would even feature a baseball episode. But lo and behold, in Attack on Titan Season